London, 1811. The evening air shimmered with a mingled scent of roses, candle wax, and polished oak, a perfume both intoxicating and oppressive. The Ashbourne Ball unfolded in grandeur, every corner of the hall ablaze with crystal chandeliers that caught the light like frozen stars. Musicians played the waltz with precise, languid grace, yet their melodies felt hollow to 19-year-old Lady Clara Ashbourne, whose heart trembled beneath the weight of expectation. Her gown of cream silk clung to her like a whisper, the delicate lace at her wrists and collar a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling beneath her calm exterior. She moved with measured steps, yet every turn of her head revealed the anxious awareness of eyes upon her, assessing, judging, and, most painfully, pitying. Clara's beauty was undeniable. Soft brown hair coiled elegantly, pale skin unmarred by a single blemish, and eyes wide with innocence and a trace of sorrow. Yet tonight, it was not admiration that greeted her, but speculation and gossip. Whispers flitted from fan to fan, from jeweled throat to jeweled throat. She is to wed the Duke of Wexham, 55 years of age. Imagine the scandal. Every word landed like a cold draft across her shoulders, reminding her that her youth had been traded as if it were coin. The Ashbournes' family estate teetered on the brink of ruin, and her hand had been offered as the price of salvation. Her father, Lord Ashbourne, lingered near the grand fireplace, cheeks flushed from brandy and nerves alike, smiling at acquaintances with the strained cheer of a man who must mask desperation behind civility. Her mother, Lady Ashbourne, resplendent in lilac satin and pearls, fluttered about, advising Clara on the proper carriage of her head, the precise curl of her lips, and the imperative of maintaining serenity at all costs. "Remember, my dear," she whispered, brushing a stray lock from Clara's forehead, "gratitude is more becoming than tears." Clara bowed her head, gripping the folds of her skirt, and whispered back, "I shall obey, mother," though her thoughts raced with quiet rebellion. She longed to speak, to protest, to insist that she was more than a commodity, yet decorum held her tongue captive. She had been raised to smile, to nod, to acquiesce, but in this moment, her spirit bristled against the invisible chains of duty. The hush that fell over the ballroom announced the arrival of the Duke of Wexham. Tall, silver-haired, his posture unyielding despite the slight tremor of age in his hands, he carried an air of authority that commanded both awe and caution. His coat of black velvet, lined with subtle embroidery, reflected the soft glow of candlelight, and the polished cane he bore tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the marble floor. He did not seek the spotlight. Rather, it sought him, drawn by his reputation as a man of immense fortune, political influence, and chilling detachment. Society had painted him as cold, distant, a man whose heart had long since been abandoned to duty and regret. When he approached, Clara could not help but notice the paradox of him. Stern, yet dignified, formidable, yet precise in manner, a man who had long buried the turbulence of youth beneath the mantle of authority. He inclined his head slightly toward her father, acknowledging the assembly with a respectful nod. Then, in a voice that was both measured and gentle, he addressed Clara. "Lady Clara, your father assures me that you are fond of gardens," he said. "Yes, your grace," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I find them peaceful." "As do I," he murmured, his gaze lingering for a fraction longer than expected. "Perhaps, in time, you may find mine so." The words were delivered without ceremony or flourish, yet they carried a weight she could not ignore. A promise, a warning, a curiosity wrapped in civility. She curtsied, sensing the scrutiny of the room upon her, the subtle glances that measured her composure, the unspoken judgment of youth offered to an older man. The whispers returned, softer now, but no less biting. She shall be his nurse, not his companion, a child in a duke's chamber. Later, Clara sought refuge in the gallery above the ballroom, the polished marble cool beneath her fingertips. From the shadowed balcony, she watched the throng below, musicians shifting their tunes as elegantly as the guests swirled about the hall. Even from a distance, the Duke commanded notice, standing apart from the dancers, observing rather than participating. There was solitude in his stance, a kind of lonely authority that seemed almost tangible. For a fleeting moment, Clara wondered if he, too, felt the sting of society's whispers, if he, too, bore the burden of expectation and the weight of a heart long disciplined by propriety. Her cousin, Eliza, approached, cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. "Clara, everyone speaks of you," she whispered hurriedly. "They say you were mourning to your own wedding, and some claim the Duke buried a wife in his halls." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of indignation and resolve. "People will always prefer horror to truth," she said softly, though her voice carried more steel than she intended. Eliza laughed nervously, failing to read the sharp edge beneath the words. "Still, it is dramatic, is it not? A duchess before your 20th birthday. Some would envy you." "I would not trade my peace for any title," Clara whispered, turning away, her gaze tracing the gilded frames of portraits on the wall. Her reflection haunted her, the delicate collarbones, the pale, unblemished skin, the wide, cautious eyes. Tomorrow, all would change. Tomorrow, her life would belong not to herself, but to a man she scarcely knew. The carriage wheels clattered through the fog-laden streets of London as dawn approached. Inside, the air was thick with silent anticipation. Her father slumbered against the worn leather seat. Her mother peered anxiously through the window, and Clara sat upright, her gloved hands resting tightly upon her lap. Each rotation of the wheels brought her closer to the unknown, closer to Wexham Manor, closer to a husband whose reputation promised sternness, and perhaps, in a flicker of hope, kindness. As the church bells tolled, announcing the hour, Clara's pulse quickened. The Duke awaited, dignified and composed. He bowed before the altar, inclining his head to her with respect rather than possession. In that fleeting gesture, she felt the smallest seed of reassurance. He did not look upon her with disdain, nor with hunger, but with measured attention. The vows passed her lips with practiced elegance. The ring slid upon her finger, and yet she could not read the future in their exchange. She knew only that her husband's hand, extended in civility, offered a hint of something unexpected, a gentleness unbefitting the society's harshest expectations. And so, as the carriage rolled away through the misty streets, past prying eyes and curious faces, Clara felt the faintest glimmer of something she had thought lost, the possibility that her days at Wexham Manor might hold more than duty, that perhaps, amidst the grandeur and gossip of Regency England, a measure of kindness, and perhaps even trust, awaited her. Thus began a union arranged by necessity, yet poised on the delicate edge of unexpected grace, with a heart's quiet stirrings would challenge both society and convention. The road ahead was uncertain, yet in that first hour of union, the story of Lady Clara and the Duke of Wexham had already begun to write itself, promising trials, revelations, and a subtle, enduring hope. The first morning at Wexham Manor arrived, cloaked in mist, the gardens glistening with dew, as if the world itself had paused to witness Clara's new life. The carriage doors opened, and she stepped onto the cobbled courtyard, silk skirts brushing against the damp stones. Her heart beat in cautious rhythm. She had left the world of London gossip behind, yet the weight of expectation pressed upon her shoulders as heavily as the folds of her gown. The Duke awaited at the top of the sweeping steps, his figure composed, his posture exact, yet there was a quiet patience in the way he regarded her, a stillness that unsettled and intrigued her in equal measure. He extended a gloved hand, not in the formal gesture of ownership, but an invitation. "Lady Clara," he said, his voice calm, resonant, carrying a warmth she had not anticipated, "permit me to show you the house, so that it may feel less like walls and more like home." She hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it, and together they moved through corridors lined with portraits of stern ancestors, heavy curtains drawn against the pale morning light. Every painting, every gilded frame, seemed to scrutinize her presence, as if measuring whether she could withstand the scrutiny of history itself. She walked quietly, observing the subtle details, the polished banisters, the hearths carved with care, the faint scent of lavender lingering in hallways long since abandoned to silence. In these halls, she began to sense the Duke not merely as a man of wealth, but as a guardian of memory, a keeper of legacies that had outlived him. Their footsteps carried them to the rose gardens, where early blooms trembled beneath the mist. Clara inhaled the fragrance, a mixture of sweetness and dew, and felt a momentary liberation from her anxiety. The Duke followed, maintaining a respectful distance, yet his presence was tangible, grounding her in the unfamiliarity of this vast estate. "You favor these gardens, I believe?" he asked, his eyes tracing the delicate petals, not her face, yet his attention was inescapable. "Yes, your grace. They bring a calm I rarely find indoors." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps we shall walk here each morning. One must not neglect solace where it can be found." There was no imperiousness in his tone, no demand of gratitude, only the simplicity of consideration. Clara felt a warmth she did not yet recognize as affection, a quiet astonishment at being treated with such respect rather than the cold expectation she had braced herself to endure. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythms of Wexham Manor revealed themselves slowly. Meals were served with ceremony, yet conversation was encouraged in ways that surprised Clara. The Duke asked about books she had read, pieces of music she enjoyed, even the trivialities of daily life. When she played the pianoforte in the drawing room, he listened attentively, not as a critic but as one who valued her presence. Occasionally, he would offer a gentle comment, a suggestion for phrasing, an observation about expression that conveyed both intelligence and appreciation. In turn, Clara found herself speaking more freely than she had anticipated, discovering that her mind was as welcomed as her appearance. Society, of course, remained unforgiving. Letters from London arrived, dripping with thinly veiled malice. Cousins and acquaintances hinted at impropriety, wondering aloud how a girl so young could endure a husband more than twice her age. One particularly sharp note arrived from a family friend, noting, "Surely the Duke's health cannot withstand such a burden, and what amusement is there in a bride who cannot inspire passion?" Clara read these words in the solitude of her chamber, a mixture of indignation and curiosity flickering across her face. She recognized the sting, yet found herself surprised at her own defense of the man who had become her companion rather than her captor. A small token arrived one afternoon, a music box exquisitely carved, with a melody that danced lightly in the air. Attached was a note in the Duke's precise handwriting. "For the evenings you feel most alone, let remind you that solitude can be shared without intrusion." Clara held it to her chest, a flicker of emotion warming her chest. The gesture was neither grand nor ostentatious, yet it spoke of attention, of thoughtfulness, and of a desire to ease her discomfort without violating her autonomy. Scandal, however, shadowed even the tenderest moments. Servants whispered, noting the oddity of their companionship. Neighbors speculated in letters to London that the marriage remained unconsummated, that the young lady ruled over the elder Duke's household with imperious grace. At a formal dinner, an acquaintance dared to allude to the Duke's age, and Clara, unaccustomed to such audacity, felt her pulse quicken. Yet instead of faltering, she met the insult with composed dignity, speaking in measured tones that surprised not only the offender but herself. The Duke's gaze met hers across the table, a subtle acknowledgment passing between them, a mixture of pride and silent amusement at her courage. Evenings became a sanctuary of quiet intimacy. They shared walks along misted pathways, speaking of art, literature, and the quiet curiosities of life. At night, by the fire, letters were exchanged even while remaining in the same house. The act itself, an intimacy born of restraint and respect. Words became vessels for thought and emotion. A line carefully chosen carried as much weight as a gesture. Clara discovered that the Duke's humor, sharp and often understated, illuminated corners of her mind that she had never dared explore. He, in turn, seemed to thrive on her youthful warmth, a presence that softened the edges of his solitude. Gradually, the walls between them began to fall. A shared smile, a brief touch of a hand, a carefully placed word of encouragement, all gestures laden with unspoken meaning. Society mocked them endlessly, yet in the private sphere of Wexham Manor, a quiet transformation occurred. The Duke's health, once fragile and subject to rumor, showed subtle signs of improvement, perhaps buoyed by Clara's presence. Her laughter, initially hesitant, began to echo through corridors that had long known only silence. The estate itself seemed to respond, rooms feeling warmer, gardens more vibrant, as if the house recognized the fragile blossoming of trust and companionship within its walls. By the close of this first season, the marriage, though founded upon necessity and the weight of family duty, had begun to transcend expectation. Clara realized that the Duke was not the fearsome figure painted by society's tone. He was a man of depth, capable of respect, kindness, and subtle affection. In turn, he appeared to recognize in Clara not merely a ward to protect or a title to inherit, but a mind and heart that could bring vitality to the house and to his life. As the final dusk of the month settled over Wexham Manor, Clara stood at the edge of the rose garden, the scent of blooms thick in the cooling air. The Duke approached silently, and for a long moment they shared the quiet acknowledgement of a bond beginning to form, one forged in patience, understanding, and the gentle defiance of societal expectation. The mists rose from the earth, curling around their feet, as though shielding them from the prying eyes of a judgmental world. And in that delicate, hushed hour, Clara felt the faintest stirrings of hope, that a marriage arranged by necessity might, against all rumor and expectation, yield a tenderness she had not thought possible. Winter had settled over Wexham Manor, draping the estate in blankets of silver frost that glinted under the pale sun. Clara moved through the halls with quiet purpose, her skirts whispering against the polished floor, each footstep echoing in the vast, empty spaces that now seemed less foreboding than in her first days. The fire crackled in the drawing room, its warmth mingling with the scent of burning oak and the faint perfume of dried lavender that Clara had insisted be placed in each chamber. Outside, the gardens were hushed beneath a layer of frost, and even the roses bowed beneath the weight of the season's chill. Yet within the manor, a new intimacy had begun to unfurl, subtle as the curling smoke from the hearth, but as undeniable as the sunlight that filtered through frost-flecked windows. The Duke of Wexham, 55 now, approaching the full weight of maturity, appeared in the doorway, leaning lightly on his cane, but with the same measured dignity that had drawn Clara's attention from their first meeting. His eyes, sharp and assessing, softened as they rested upon her. "You seem contemplative this morning," he remarked, voice low and calm, though threaded with curiosity. Clara paused in her tidying, folding a cloth with deliberate care before meeting his gaze. "I find the stillness suits reflection," she answered, her tone careful yet honest. "It reminds one that time moves even when the world seems frozen." He nodded, stepping closer, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. "And yet, reflection without confession can leave the heart burdened. There are truths I have long carried, Lady Clara, which I have scarcely shared with another living soul." She turned fully, curiosity piqued despite the unease that always accompanied his serious expression. "May I hear them, Your Grace?" she asked, not merely as a question, but as an invitation, an acknowledgement that some walls could be breached by trust alone. He gestured to the seat near the fire, and she accepted, the warmth enveloping her as if it were a protective cloak. The Duke seated himself with care, fingers interlacing over his cane. "When I was younger," he began, voice dropping to a near whisper, "I loved with a fervor I now recognize as folly. The woman I adored, my first, my only true passion, was lost to circumstance and to the unyielding strictures of society. I married out of duty afterward, and for decades, I carried the emptiness that followed, convincing myself that reason and propriety could suffice where the heart failed. Clara listened intently, sensing the gravity behind each word. His confession was not theatrical. It was measured, deliberate, and layered with vulnerability. For the first time, she saw not the formidable, distant figure society painted, but a man who had suffered, who had endured solitude by choice and necessity. A quiet sympathy arose within her, tempered by respect and a growing understanding that the man before her was as capable of tenderness as of authority. "I did not know," she admitted softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the seat as though seeking courage in its firmness. "I have known loss, in ways perhaps different, yet similarly profound. To live under expectation and demand, to have one's heart constrained by circumstance, it is a heavy burden." He inclined his head, acknowledging her insight. "Indeed, and yet, your presence here has reminded me that companionship need not be dictated by past failures or societal judgment. It is a rare gift to encounter another whose mind and heart seek understanding, rather than subservience or admiration alone." The fire flickered, shadows dancing across the high ceilings, and in that motion, Clara felt an unspoken connection solidify between them. Words were no longer merely polite exchange. They became vessels of trust, of shared vulnerability. She dared to meet his gaze fully, noticing the subtle quiver in his lips, the way his eyes softened at moments when honesty overrode pride. The Duke, in turn, seemed invigorated by her presence, the sharp lines of his face relaxing when her observation struck at truths long buried beneath decorum. Over the following days, this exchange of confidences became a quiet ritual. They shared letters, composed in the safety of their private chambers, detailing thoughts, fears, and small joys. A note might accompany the morning tea, a reflection on a line of poetry, a comment on the frost's effect upon the gardens, a musing on a painting recently admired. Each letter carried weight, each word chosen with care, and the act of writing became an intimacy in itself, a dialogue of souls rather than a mere correspondence of manners. One evening, during a particularly harsh snowstorm, Clara found the Duke seated near the fire with a small volume of poetry in his hand. "You have read these lines before," he said, voice soft. "Yet their meaning deepens when shared aloud with another who listens." She approached quietly, drawn by the cadence of his speech, the warmth radiating from both fire and presence. "May I sit with you?" she asked, a tremor of hope threading her voice. "Please," he replied, inclining a chair toward her. Together they listened to the verses, the words floating between them like tendrils of smoke, forming bridges of understanding. When a particularly tender stanza concluded, the Duke's eyes met hers, and Clara saw the faintest glimmer of vulnerability, a crack in the armor of decades. She realized then that the man who had once seemed untouchable was capable of trust and, perhaps, even affection. The turning point came when the Duke fell ill, a sudden fever that threatened the balance of their household. Clara, though anxious, tended to him with gentle attentiveness, preparing broths, adjusting blankets, and reading aloud to keep his spirits buoyed. Each moment revealed her courage, her capacity for empathy, and the quiet strength that had lain beneath her youthful exterior. In turn, the Duke recognized the depth of her character, marveling at the combination of intellect, grace, and resilience she possessed. During these nights, confessions became bolder. He spoke of regrets, not shared with even the most trusted advisors, of mistakes and moments of shame that had haunted him. She, too, admitted her fears of inadequacy, of judgment, of living a life governed entirely by others' expectations. In this exchange, they discovered a profound companionship, one that transcended the arrangements that had brought them together. One night, as snow fell silently against the leaded windows, the Duke reached across the small space between them and, with a careful touch, took her hand. "Clara," he whispered, voice trembling ever so slightly, It seems that duty has given way to something unanticipated. I find myself drawn to you in ways I cannot name with propriety alone." Clara felt warmth surge through her, not merely from the fire but from the recognition of a shared understanding, a mutual awakening of hearts. "I feel it too," she admitted, words soft but resolute. "Not because I must, but because I wish to. Not because society demands, but because it feels right." As the storm raged outside, the manor seemed to cocoon them from the world, insulating them from prying eyes and scandalous whispers. In that private confession, the foundation of love was laid. Not hurried, not claimed, but earned through trust, patience, and the acknowledgement of each other's vulnerabilities. By the end of winter, the relationship between Lady Clara and the Duke of Wexham had transformed. What began as a union of convenience, constrained by social expectation and family duty, had grown into a tender, profound companionship. Both had confronted their fears, acknowledged past sorrows, and discovered in each other a mirror for understanding, empathy, and perhaps the first sparks of enduring love. Even as London whispered its disapproval and neighbors speculated upon their unusual arrangement, within the walls of Wexham Manor, a quiet revolution of the heart had taken place. The Duke, once resigned to solitude, and Clara, once fearful of confinement, had found in each other the rare gift of companionship tempered by respect, intellect, and unspoken affection. And though winter would eventually yield to spring, the bond forged in candlelight and frost promised that the forthcoming season would bring with it revelations, challenges, and a love unanticipated yet profoundly deserved. Spring arrived at Wexham Manor with a brilliance that seemed almost unnatural after the long, silent winter. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, gilding the portraits of long-dead ancestors and painting the polished floors in gold. The gardens, once bowed beneath frost and snow, now blazed with roses, tulips, and delicate white lilies, their colors vibrant against the emerald of freshly mown lawns. Birds filled the air with song, and the gentle murmur of fountains created a soundtrack of serenity. Within this flourishing estate, the transformation of Lady Clara and the Duke of Wexham had reached a crescendo, a subtle yet undeniable evolution from duty-bound strangers to companions of profound affection. The Duke, who had weathered the rigors of age and illness with quiet fortitude, now moved through the halls with renewed vigor. His steps, once measured with the caution of fragility, carried a liveliness that surprised even the most long-serving staff. Clara noticed the subtle shift, the way his eyes lit upon the first bloom of spring in the gardens, how his hands, though still marked by the passage of time, moved with confidence and purpose. He had regained not only his health, but a spark of life that had long lain dormant, and Clara, witnessing this, felt a deep, almost maternal pride entwined with affection. Society, of course, had not relinquished its judgment so easily. Rumors and letters had followed the seasons, some maliciously speculating upon the propriety of their relationship, others offering quiet envy at the young lady's courage in navigating a union so widely misunderstood. Invitations from London's elite arrived, carefully phrased, measuring the propriety of her comportment, as though her conduct could validate or invalidate the Duke himself. Clara, guided by a newfound confidence, navigated these gatherings with poise and grace. She spoke with intelligence, laughter lightly touching her words, disarming those who expected timid compliance. And behind her composure, the Duke watched, silently affirming her courage and subtly acknowledging that her wit and warmth had become indispensable to his own happiness. One afternoon, as the sun poured gold across the rose garden, the Duke approached Clara carrying a small, folded note. "A messenger arrived this morning," he said, voice calm yet infused with a quiet anticipation. "It seems even London cannot resist commenting upon our union." He handed her the paper, and she read silently. The letter praised her conduct, her intellect, and the unexpected grace with which she had adapted to life at Wexham Manor. It acknowledged that the marriage, once scorned, had become an exemplar of respect and companionship. Clara allowed herself a small, private smile, folding the letter and slipping it into her pocket. Their daily walks through the gardens became a ritual of ease and intimacy. They spoke of art and music, of plans for the estate, and of small details that revealed the depth of their understanding of each other. The Duke revealed intentions to restore the manor's neglected library, commissioning rare volumes and maps, while Clara orchestrated the revival of the rose gardens, adding new beds and arranging paths where sunlight caught the doom most beautifully. Each act of renewal mirrored their personal growth. Wounds healed, trust solidified, and laughter, once rare, now echoed through corridors and arched walkways. Evenings were spent in the drawing room, where the fire's warmth reflected in their eyes and softened the sharp angles of worry that had once been permanent. Clara played the pianoforte, her fingers dancing over keys with skill and expression, and the Duke listened attentively, occasionally murmuring observations that revealed not only understanding but genuine admiration. In these moments, the distance of years seemed to vanish. Age became inconsequential, eclipsed by the intimacy of shared experience and mutual respect. Yet society's whispers could not be entirely silenced. During a gathering at the manor, an acquaintance from London, bold in her curiosity, remarked upon the Duke's age and Clara's youth, insinuating impropriety. Clara, now steady in her sense of self and secure in her understanding of the Duke, met the comment with measured composure. "Perhaps it is true," she replied softly, "that age and youth often travel different paths, yet it is the heart's direction that guides the steps we take together." The room fell silent, and the Duke's eyes met hers, filled with approval, gratitude, and something deeper, a recognition that she had grown into not only a partner, but an equal in every sense. The culmination of their journey, however, came in private rather than in public acclaim. One late evening, under a sky veiled with stars, they walked the winding paths of the rose garden. Clara paused, allowing the cool night air to stir the tendrils of her hair. The Duke halted beside her, taking her gloved hands gently into his own. "Clara," he began, voice low yet firm, "the months we have shared have been unlike any in my life. Where I once measured existence by duty and expectation, I now measure it by the moments we have spent in trust, in laughter, and in shared understanding. You have awakened in me a capacity for joy I thought forever lost." Her heart trembled, a delicate mixture of surprise, delight, and profound relief. "And you, Your Grace," she whispered, "have shown me that a life dictated by duty need not be empty, that one may discover love, even where least expected, when respect and kindness are the foundations upon which it grows." The Duke's expression softened, the stern lines of his face giving way to a vulnerability he had seldom displayed. "Then let us continue together," he said, "not because society demands it, not because our families dictated it, but because our hearts, against all expectation, have chosen each other." And so, under the constellation-strewn sky, with roses at their feet and the soft murmur of fountains in the distance, their union was fully affirmed. Not a marriage of convenience, but a partnership of souls that had weathered expectation, scandal, and doubt to arrive at mutual devotion. The world beyond Wexham Manor could speculate and gossip, but within the walls of the estate, love had triumphed in the quiet, profound way that few could witness, but all might feel in the aura of sincerity and grace. As spring deepened, the manor itself seemed to celebrate this transformation. Birds nested in the restored eaves, sunlight danced through newly polished windows, and the halls echoed with Clara's laughter and the Duke's amused commentary. Guests from London, once skeptical, now spoke in admiration of the harmony evident within the estate, a harmony born not of wealth or title, but of patience, understanding, and the deliberate cultivation of trust. By the time the season reached its full bloom, the story of Lady Clara and the Duke of Wexham had become a testament to the triumph of affection over expectation. A marriage born of necessity had evolved into one of the era's most tender unions, proving that love, when nurtured with respect and patience, could defy rumor, age, and the rigid confines of society. And as they stood together in the gardens one quiet afternoon, hand in hand, the sun warming their faces and roses in full bloom around them, Clara and the Duke understood that the journey they had undertaken, through doubt, gossip, and tentative trust, had led them to a place where their hearts could flourish unimpeded. It was a love forged not in haste or convenience, but in the deliberate cultivation of understanding, compassion, and shared joy, a love timeless and ageless, destined to endure beyond the whispers of society and the passage of years.